So for the last few weeks, last week accepted because Children's Christmas Program, which is a nice break, we've been talking about sin. We've been talking about the brokenness of the world. And I started by saying that the world is broken, but that the brokenness of the world does not overwhelm the goodness of the world. And then I talked about how what was broken was not so much rules, but relationships. Our relationship with God, our relationships with each other, our relationships especially with the least of these, which are themselves a reflection of our relationship with God. And then I talked about how relationships come in webs. Things are connected to other things. People are connected to other people in ways that we don't always see. There are big systems that are broken because they are made up of broken relationships. And then I talked about how those big systems and those broken relationships distort our very ideas of what goodness is. We get weird ideas about justice and peace and hope and joy and love and mercy and all of those things. We distort them and shift them and change them, and they themselves end up in our minds broken. And now we're here. After all of that, let's face it, kind of depressing stuff, we are on the fourth Sunday of Advent when we talk about love. And we are almost to Christmas Eve when we will tell a story. A story that all of history revolves around. And the story that we tell is important. I told you before, months ago, ages ago, it feels like that stories are maps. Stories tell us who we are and who we should be. Stories tell us where we are and where we are going. The story that we choose shapes the world. It shapes the world that we live in. It shapes the world that we try to live in. The story that we tell is important. And there's a story that gets told, a story that gets proclaimed as a gospel, as good news, a story that is preached in churches, a story that is shouted on street corners, a story that is whispered in quiet conversations. And it says, God is wrath. God sees this broken world and is disgusted by it. God sees this broken world and hates its brokenness. And God is going to one day, perhaps very soon, take this broken world and smash it and pulverize it into dust and burn it to ashes. And if we're lucky, if we believe all the right things in all the right ways, and if we believe hard enough, and if we figure out the footnotes and the fine print, and if we do all of the things, maybe, just maybe, this God will snatch us away before he does that. And we will get to live in a new, better, unbroken, unbreakable, titanium world. I don't see how that story is good news. It is not good news for the broken world. It is not good news for the brokenness of the world. It is not good news for those of us who are not always sure that we're believing the right things in the right ways. are not always sure that we're believing hard enough, are not sure that we like the footnotes and the fine print, reject, in fact, a lot of the footnotes and the fine print. It's not a story that I find in Scripture. It's not a story that I see in the tradition. It's not a story that I see in the story that we will start telling tonight about the God who comes into the world as one of us. Here is the story that I prefer. Here is the gospel that I will preach. Here is the thing that works for me. God is love. God is love. There are no footnotes. There is no fine print. God is love, and God looks on a broken world with love, with compassion. And even now, God is picking up that world and putting the pieces back together. God is repairing those relationships. God is fixing the systems. God is finding even the smallest spider web of a crack that runs through our idea of love or peace or hope or joy or justice or mercy, and getting the pieces to fit together. I've talked about before this Japanese art, Kintsugi. Don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, meant to look it up. It's this art where you take something that is broken, a bowl, let's say. You take the shards and you get them together and you fill in the cracks with gold, or silver, or some other precious metal. And the bowl doesn't look like it looked before. It doesn't erase everything. You can still see the cracks. They're gold, after all. They stand out, but they are made beautiful. Part of the artwork. And the bowl is made whole again. And the cracks are made beautiful. And the whole thing becomes as it should be. The brokenness is just part of the story. The brokenness of the world does not overwhelm the goodness of the world. The brokenness of the bowl does not overwhelm the beauty of the bowl. The brokenness of the world does not overwhelm the beauty of the world. Because the God who is love is filling in the cracks with love. Is taking the chips and filling them with grace. Is making the world beautiful in its brokenness. And yeah, that means that the brokenness is still there a little bit. We can still see the signs of it. They're filled in with love. They're filled in with grace, but it makes the world beautiful somehow. It adds to the art. It redeems the very brokenness of the world. And that by itself is good news. That all on its own is good news. The world will be made whole. The world is being made whole. The cracks in the world are being filled in with love. The chips in the world are being filled in with grace. The fissures in the world are being filled in with God. The world in all of its brokenness is being made beautiful. But it gets better. Because God is not doing this alone. God is not sitting in the highest heaven with a bottle of guerrilla love, I guess. Smearing it over a broken world. No, God comes into the world as one of us and recruits us to the work. God comes into the world as one of us and calls to us, invites us, brings us along to see the places where the world is broken and to fill that brokenness with love until every bit of brokenness is made beautiful. Until love abounds, until the whole world is full of grace. And as we move out of Advent and into Christmas and into the year and years ahead, that is God's call to us to find what is broken, to fix it with love, to make it beautiful. And in so doing, to find our own brokenness filled with love and our own being made beautiful. And that is good news.